Galw'r cynulliad cenedlaethol I drefn a'r eitem gyntaf ar yn agenda prynawn yma yw cwestiynau'r prif weinidog a'r cwestiwn cyntaf Janet Finch Saunders.
Diolch Llywyd. Will the First Minister make a statement on the health service in North Wales?
Yes, our priorities for the health service in the north and throughout Wales are to continue to protect investment and deliver the range of commitments set out in taking Wales forward.
Well, clearly your priorities are not orthopaedic care in North Wales, First Minister, because I hope you are as shocked as I am with the recent findings of a 5,000% increase in those having gone longer than the 36 weeks of treatment time for orthopaedic and trauma services. That is 3,052 patients now having gone considerably longer than that. I have constituents 80 weeks requiring a knee replacement, 130 weeks for a hip replacement. These individuals are in constant and sickening pain 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, fed up with popping several really serious pain killers. And then to learn yesterday that all orthopaedic replacement surgery in Ysbyty Glan Clwyd is now on hold. I'm also advised the Entley ward is closed currently for surgery. That frustrates me and my constituents even more. Such delays in this kind of treatment is a national scandal. And if this is an example of your government put in a health board in special measures 18 months ago, then serious questions must be raised. How, under your watch, have you allowed such scandalous waiting times? And what will you do now as First Minister, please, on behalf of my constituents and those patients across North Wales, to investigate the matter urgently and to provide my constituents and others with the appropriate treatment?
You do need to bring your question to an end. You have asked several questions.
With the appropriate treatment they not only need, but they deserve.
Well, the majority of patients waiting in North Wales are waiting less than 26 weeks, but we do recognise that trauma and orthopaedics is a challenging area where some waiting times are not acceptable. Extra money has been made available to the to Betsy Cadwaladr LHB in order to reduce waiting times. They are outsourcing some activity now to alternative providers, and we expect to see the situation improve markedly over the course of the next 2 months.
Llyr Griffin.
Diolch Llywyd. Yn gynharach y mis yma, mi gyhoeddwyd adroddiad diogelwch blynyddol Bwrdd Iechyd Betsy Cadwaladr oedd yn eitha frewchus I ddarllen. Mae rhaid I fi ddweud roedd gofrestr risg yn dangos 13 risg difrifol yn cynnwys I methiant I gyd yn ffurfio gwahanol ddeddfwriaethau diogelu, neu fod yna beryg gwirioneddol y bydde plentyn neu berson ar y gofrestr mewn risg yn methu a cael ei hadnabod pe bydden nhw'n mynychu'r uned frys allai wedyn arwain at niwed difrifol i'r unigolyn. Nawr, ar ôl blwyddyn a hanner o fod mewn mesurau arbennig, ydych chi'n meddwl bod hynny'n dderbyniol?
Wel, ni'n gwybod, wrth gwrs, bod y hynna ddim yn barod I ddod mas o fysau'r arbennig ar hyn o bryd, ond wrth gweud hynny, ni'n gwybod wrth ystyried yn eang perfformiad y bwrdd iechyd, beth wedi gwella. Fe welwn ni hwnna wrth edrych ar y fframwaith ym mis Tachwedd, lle yn dangos bod gwaith da wedi cael ei wneud. Ac wrth gwrs, beth sy'n bwysig nawr yw sicrhau bod bob rhan o'r gwasanaeth sydd wedi cael ei weithredu gan y bwrdd iechyd yn gwella yn yr un ffordd a byddwn wedi gwella ynglyn a delio gyda chancer enghraifft a delio gyda amserau aros am brofion diagnosis.
Michelle Brown.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, how can you justify offering free prescriptions and additional childcare regardless of income and at huge cost, while the number of people waiting for orthopaedic treatment in North Wales has rocketed? Where are your priorities?
Because we were elected on that basis, and I can't speak for her party, but we like to keep our promises.
Question 2, David Melson.
First Minister, make a statement on the provision of bespoke mental health services for former armed service personnel.
Yes, taking Wales forward confirms our commitment to ensuring veterans continue to receive healthcare that meets their needs, and we will maintain the valuable National Veterans NHS Wales Service, which provides access to evidence-based treatments for veterans with mental health problems.
First Minister, can I welcome what you've just said there about preserving the service? You are actually leading the way in the UK, and I commend you for that. But as we now review this service that has had a lot of initial success, I think we are perhaps too reliant on self-referral. That seems to be one of the things that's come through at the moment. And I think one key objective should be to inform veterans at the resettlement stage as they move into civilian life of this service. That time of life can itself be very challenging, but of course they may then have information which could be very, very important to them a few months or years hence.
Yes, I take the point that the member makes. We know that there are high levels of satisfaction with the service that is provided to veterans. It may be, of course, well, I think we can do this. We can raise the issue with the Royal British Legion and indeed the armed forces to see what more could be done to inform veterans of the availability of the service, and of course to encourage them to seek help from the service rather than hold back. But I will. Well, I mean, the Minister will have heard what's been said in the Chamber, and if we can do more to improve communication to ensure that people can benefit from a service that does have such high rates of satisfaction, then we will.
Neil McAvoy.
Diolch, Llywydd. First Minister, I wonder if you know that I've submitted a motion as a member's legislative proposal to bring about a No Soldier Left Behind Act. But the Business Committee decided not to support it this time. But the fact is, there are just too many veterans coming to my surgery.
Can I just correct? It is not timetabled. The decision taken by the Business Committee is not to be questioned on this floor, and it is not to be timetabled. Priority has been given to another member as a legislative proposal.
OK, thank you, Chloe, for your clarification. So we do have an opportunity to bring it back, it seems. But too many veterans are struggling for healthcare, struggling for housing, and especially, as the colleague across the chamber said, mental health care. Local authorities don't have to give veterans priority. Now, the reality is that we don't leave soldiers behind on the battlefield, and we shouldn't be leaving them behind when they come home. So will your government support a bill, legislation, to make sure that what a lot of people are suffering at the minute no longer happens, and we make a difference and make a change to the lives of these people?
It depends, of course, what the bill says. At the moment, all I know is that there's a suggestion, and we have to see what the detail might be. It may be that a lot of the issues that the member raises are already being covered by the service as it stands. We do make £585,000 available each year to fund the service. It does provide therapeutic interventions from dedicated veteran therapists in each local health board. It also has a referral pathway to signpost veterans to other areas in order for them to get help and support. I suppose the question would be, would a bill add to that? And much of it would depend on what was in the bill before taking a proper view on whether a bill would add to the service that's available already.
Caroline Jones.
Diolch, Llywydd. First Minister, just over 2 years ago, a Welsh Government review of the Veterans NHS Wales service found that veterans were waiting up to 80 days for an initial assessment and up to 140 days from assessment. The review also highlighted the fact that the service would face additional pressures resulting from the UK Defence and Security Review. In total, 15 recommendations were made as a result of the review. First Minister, can you update us on the progress that has been made by Welsh Government and the local health boards in implementing the recommendations, reducing waiting times for veterans and ensuring the service can respond to future demand?
Yes, that report was received in November 2014. It did show high satisfaction rates among veterans using the service. It did make a number of recommendations to improve service provision, and those recommendations have been accepted and are being taken forward.
Cwestiynau nawr gan arweinwyr y pleidiau, arweinydd Plaid Cymru, Leanne Wood.
Diolch, Llywydd. First Minister, following the announcement of President Trump's racist travel ban, there have been demonstrations throughout the world, including here in Wales, rejecting the idea of division. But the issue is wider than that, just that specific ban. The whole question of migration has become a toxic debate. Will you join me and others in this Assembly to make it clear that Wales remains open for business, open to visitors, and, just as importantly, open to those fleeing prosecution? And do you agree with me that this politics of division on the grounds of national origin or religion has no place in Wales or indeed anywhere else?
Those sentiments. We are, each and every one of us in this chamber, the descendants of immigrants. It's a question of when our families came to this island. Much more unites us as human beings than can possibly divide us. And I do share the view that what is the current debate in more than one country around the world regarding migration is toxic. It is ironic that the debate is sometimes at its most toxic in countries that are made up of immigrants of first, second and third generation. That is the irony of this. But the reality is that we know that when nationalism, in terms of extreme right-wing nationalism, is allowed to take a grip, as we saw in the 1930s, the result is calamity.
Thank you for your answer, First Minister, and I would agree with much of the sentiment that you expressed there. Now, one of the factors that was influential in the EU referendum result was the issue of wages and the undercutting of labour. Now, that this exploitation is happening, there's no doubt about that. You'll be aware, as I am, of unscrupulous employers charging for accommodation and nominally deducting it from people's wages, and those workers are not in trade unions. They're often being effectively paid below the minimum wage. Now, migrant workers are being exploited, and those employers are also undercutting Welsh workers. So both types of workers are losing out. Yesterday, we met with the UK Government Secretary of State for exiting the European Union, and this point was made, I think it's fair to say, strongly. This morning, I've written to the UK Prime Minister calling for much stronger enforcement, just as I called on previous Labour governments to do. It has to be dealt with because this undercutting and exploitation is being used by some politicians to exploit people's concerns about migration. Even the Secretary of State for Wales yesterday was joining in, flying in the face of facts and evidence as to why wages have been stagnant. Does the First Minister agree with me that the exploitation of workers by unscrupulous employers has to stop? And will he agree to tackle it using whatever powers may be available to him, regardless of the outcome of the Brexit negotiations?
Well, indeed. I mean, she and I were at that meeting with David Davis yesterday. He agreed. He agreed with what we said. Yeah. But the question is, of course, agreeing is one thing, action is another. The point was made, and she made the point. That we have not seen prosecutions for breaches of minimum wage legislation, largely because it's not quite as straightforward as that. She will know, I've mentioned in this chamber before now, that I have heard believable testimony from Polish workers particularly, that they are being paid the minimum wage, but there are other methods that are used in order to deduct money from them, such as unrealistic bonds when they go into accommodation, bonds against damage, and when they get there they find the accommodation is white furniture, white carpets, white walls, very difficult to keep in full order. We made the point, both of us yesterday, that there's a huge amount of work to do in order to make sure that these people are brought to account, these unscrupulous employers, because she is quite right. They exploit migrant workers and make things at lower standards as a result for workers in the whole of the UK. Absolutely. Unfortunately, many of the people who sit at the moment in the UK government are not interested in the rights either of migrant workers or British workers.
You're right, First Minister. There are a number of ways that unscrupulous employers can exploit workers, but this question of the minimum wage is a key one. Last time I looked, HMRC only employed 6 people to enforce the national minimum wage, and it's clearly not a priority for the UK government. There have been minimal prosecutions in recent years, and that was the case under the previous Labour government as well, is fair to say. Will you join me in condemning, in the strongest possible terms, those politicians who seek to peddle myths about the reasons behind people's wages being squeezed? Because while we are pointing out at migrants, instead of the government's inaction towards rogue employers, we are letting the real culprits off the hook. And will you also commit to this Assembly today to let us know what Welsh Government resources you will be able to identify to stop this exploitation, so that enforcement and, if necessary, the naming and shaming of rogue employers can take place?
What I would like to do is to work closely with those communities affected so they don't feel afraid to come forward to offer their testimony. Quite often that will be done under the promise of anonymity, and that is something that we will look to take forward. Recently, I finished reading Dennis Skinner's autobiography. Now, he's not normally a politician who I would share a huge amount in common, perhaps in many ways, but what he did say about Polish workers in the mines after the war was interesting. He said there was no animosity towards them because they were members of a trade union. They were not seen in any way as undercutting wages. They were seen as being in the same position, and they had the same protections as workers in the UK. And that's exactly what we need to get back to. Too many people have low wages, firstly because of austerity, and secondly because they don't have the support of a trades union. And we know that workplaces that are unionised deliver better terms and conditions for those people who work in those workplaces. And that's why it's so important to make sure that all workers, as much as we can get them to that point, are covered through trade union membership wherever they come from in the world.
Arweinydd y Ceidwadwyr Cymreig, Andrew R.T. Davies.
Thank you, Prime Minister. First Minister, on Saturday is World Cancer Day. Something which many members in this chamber would have been touched by, and I know yourself and my family as well have had an unfortunate episode where we've lost a loved one to cancer. 1 in 2 of us going forward will have an episode of cancer in our lives, down from 1 in 3. So the odds of people getting cancer are increasing by the day and by the week. Regrettably, the Welsh Government's target of a 62-day target time has not been met since 2008. That aside, there is much good progress as well going on in cancer services across Wales. What is your overview of the delivery of cancer services here in Wales? Bear in mind, we have this National Cancer Day to look forward to on the weekend to reflect on where we're at, and 1 in 2 of us will have an episode of cancer in our lifetime.
Well, I declare an interest here, as members will know, and is registered in the Register of Interest. My wife is employed by Macmillan. What is clear over the next 10 years is that there are 2 developments that people will find if they are diagnosed with cancer. Firstly, more and more people are living with cancer. That's the phrase that is used. Cancers that perhaps cannot be cured in the conventional sense of 5 years remission, but that actually allow people to live a normal life and doesn't necessarily shorten their lives as a result with the right level of treatment. And secondly, huge progress is being made, and we are fortunate to have the Centre for Cancer Genetics in Cardiff in developing treatments that are tailored to the genetic needs of the individual. Cancer treatment has been, for many, many years, rather a blunt instrument. The same kinds of treatments were applied to people over the years. It was more like trial and error. We are in the forefront of the development of cancer genetics and treatment in Wales, and I want to make sure that more and more people have the opportunity to be rid of cancer, of course, in the course of their lives, but who are able to live with cancer because they have the support, both pharmaceutical and moral support, in order to do that.
You are right to point out the positives in cancer treatments and the developments and the way Wales is leading the field in some of these areas. The Cancer Bank at Velindre Hospital is another very good example of pioneering science, pioneering technology. Your government has targets for having 1 million Welsh speakers by 2050. There's a statement this afternoon towards 2030 from the Education Secretary. There is a goal that the British Lung Cancer Coalition have, which is to increase the survival rates from lung cancer. Irrespective of wherever you live across the United Kingdom, the survival rates are very, very poor indeed. 16% in other parts of the United Kingdom, 5-6% here in Wales. I think you'll agree with me that that is something that we've got to desperately improve. Now, they have a target to increase the survival from lung cancer after 5 years up to 25% by 2025. I've highlighted other goals your government has set. Will you be prepared to set that as a goal for your government to work to, certainly up till 2021, and hopefully to deliver?
Yes, I think that's reasonable. We want to see more people live with and ultimately survive lung cancer. The survival rates are around about 8 or 9%, if I remember rightly. They're in single figures, and they are low. Much of it is because early diagnosis is so crucial to any type of cancer, and the symptoms don't manifest themselves quite often unless people present as acute cases in the hospitals. I do believe that our GPs are referring people as they should. There's no question to my mind that is happening, and that people are receiving the attention that they need. Where people have complex forms of cancer, of course, sometimes multiple tumours, then it does take some time to begin a course of treatment, because that treatment has to be planned in the most effective way for them. But I have no difficulty, of course, in looking to support an initiative that wants to cut the number of deaths through lung cancer in the way that the leader of the Welsh Conservatives has described.
Thank you for that commitment, First Minister, because if that commitment is met, it could potentially save 600 lives who are dying prematurely through lung cancer at the moment here in Wales. And ultimately, that is a goal surely we should all be striving to. 2 weeks ago, I held an event for patient voices around cancer services. And at that event, Tom Crosby, who's the clinical lead for cancer services here in Wales, highlighted the importance of bringing forward a cancer plan to underpin cancer development in in services, about bringing oncologists into Wales and developing long-term sustainable services. Now, if we're going to hit that target of an increase in survival up to 25% by 2025, and if we want to be serious about getting on the track now, we need to bring that plan forward. And when people like Tom Crosbie are identifying that as a need, I hope you will agree that the government does need to listen to him and listen to others who are saying that is what is required to drive the strategy forward. And indeed, Macmillan, who you identified as in the members' interest, identified only last week that there needs to be a dramatic improvement in the delivery of services for patients in 2017. Will you commit to bringing forward a cancer plan along the lines of what Tom Crosbie has identified, and indeed an improvement in services that Macmillan have called for in 2017?
The leader of the Welsh Conservatives will no doubt know that these are issues that are raised constantly in the House where I live, and the points are made very strongly, and rightly so. We will listen, of course, to those who suggest different ways in which cancer can be dealt with. We have a cancer delivery plan, of course. We want to ensure that we have the right level of medical staff in Wales, is why we have a recruitment campaign that we launched last year. And of course, hugely important to work with third sector organisations who provide support for people who are diagnosed. The shock of a cancer diagnosis can often be heightened by the need for treatment, hospital stays, the knock in someone's income that takes, the knock in the confidence of an individual that takes. And so it's a question as well of making sure people have support outside. I've seen, and you will know that I've seen similar examples, people who, because they have received support and because they have kept their spirits in the right place, their mind in the right place, they have survived cancer, whereas other people who have lost their spirit don't survive, and I've seen that. So hugely important that whilst he makes the point we have the right level of medical staff in order to deliver the treatments, that we're also able to ensure that people have the most comprehensive and holistic support around them in order to help them fight the disease as well.
Arweinydd Grŵp UKIP, Neil Hamilton.
First Minister will know that the Ford Motor Company recently cancelled a £1.6 billion proposed investment in Mexico and decided instead to increase investment in its plant in Michigan by $700 million. This is partly, they say, a vote of confidence in the Trump administration's policy. 1,850 jobs in Ford in Bridgend depend upon that company, despite their decision to slash a proposed investment by nearly £100 million last September. Does the First Minister think that those jobs are rendered more secure by his insulting call to cancel the proposed invitation to President Trump to make a state visit to the United Kingdom?
Well, if he wishes to be... Well, I'll remind the Ford Motor Company has condemned Donald Trump's comments over the weekend. I've seen that, but they have done that. We all see the chaos that has resulted in America. It's for him to act as an advocate for the US government, not for me. But what I can say to him is the greatest threat to the Ford engine plant is the possibility of a barrier between it and its only customer in Germany. It exports every single engine that it makes. If there are barriers in place between that engine plant and Germany, Ford will be tempted over the years to shift their production to Craiova in Romania or to other plants in Europe. I want Ford to be on a level playing field with those other plants and not be put in a position of weakness.
My point is the importance of continued prospering trade relationship with the United States, which will to an extent depend upon having a positive relationship with the United States government. Now, I appreciate that there will be different views around the Chamber on the domestic policies of the United States government and indeed President Trump's apparent views on world trade. But given that the United States is Wales's biggest individual nation trading partner, we exported £2,664 million worth of exports to that country to June 2016. That's 22% of all the exports from Wales. Is it not vitally important that we should be as positive towards President Trump in our international relations and therefore welcome a state visit from him later this year?
Well, first of all, it is right that we engage the US government. I'll be in America at the end of next month, as I am at Capitol Hill, hosting a reception, working with the Congress, with the caucus of the Welsh caucus of Congress members as well, and I'll keep on doing that. But it was Theresa May herself who said that we should speak frankly to friends. She has not done that. She has not done that. And I think it's hugely important that, that these points are made. The phrase that I've used is I think it's very difficult to imagine a successful state visit at the moment, given all the controversy. I'm also surprised at the timing of this. Bill Clinton never had a state visit, nor to my knowledge did George Bush, nor did Ronald Reagan. 2 other presidents had state visits, but at least 2 years after they became president. So it's a strange, the timing is strange, I have to say. I don't criticise Theresa May for trying to forge links with the US government, regardless of who is in power. That is, that's the nature of international diplomacy. But it also means that if we are truly to be, as it were, friendly critics, if I can use that phrase, of the US government, then the British government surely should not refrain from doing that.
Well, Theresa May, of course, has given friendly criticism to President Trump already in various ways. And I'm not against being candid with our allies, but there is a difference in diplomacy between candid criticism given in a polite and private way and the kind of megaphone diplomacy which is more concerned with grandstanding and virtue signalling in this country for domestic political gain.
I think he sat down when he heard the words Nigel Farage being uttered in the chamber. The master of megaphone diplomacy, somebody who is Donald Trump's representative on earth at the moment. From my perspective, the words I have chosen, I believe, have been appropriate, and I think they are self-evident to most people in Britain. As I said yesterday, if circumstances change, the circumstances around the visit may well change as well, although given the events of the last few days and well, members can make their own mind about what's been happening in the US. We still have no real clarity on what it means, even for British passport holders, despite what Boris Johnson said yesterday. I think there are issues for the Prime Minister. First question is, when did she know about this? If it was Friday, did she make representations? When did she know about the conditions that were attached to the executive order? And if so, did she make representations for British citizens and British passport holders? Why, when she was asked about the order, did she simply say, well, this is a matter for the US? If it had been any other country, she would not, I believe, have made that response. Why did it take so long for Boris Johnson to get on the phone to clarify the position, even though it appears that it's not quite as clear as he has suggested in Parliament? These are all questions, I think, that the Prime Minister has to answer. Of course, we have to have a relationship with the US government. Of course, we will continue our relationship with the US businesses who invest in Wales. Wales is open to US business, but that does not mean that we should say nothing about policies that are put in place with which we disagree. We have not done that with countries like China. We have not done that with countries like Russia. It is right then that we should also make our views known when we disagree with something that the US does, rather than be quiet and sit in the corner. That I believe is not the right way for the UK to conduct its affairs.
Question 3, John Griffiths.
Will the First Minister make a statement on the Welsh Government's progress in achieving a more physically active Wales?
Well, taking Wales forward sets out our ambition to increase levels of physical activity, and existing initiatives to encourage physical activity are having an impact, and further measures are being considered, and they're outlined indeed in the forthcoming, will be outlined rather in the forthcoming Healthy and Active strategy.
First Minister, every Saturday morning at 9 a.m. right across Wales, thousands of people take part in park runs. They're volunteer-led, they're timed. People are able to chart their progress as they hopefully improve their times over the months and indeed the years. In Newport, the existing Tregear House Park Run has just been added to with a city centre urban park run along the riverside. I took part in recent events and enjoyed the benefits, as so many others do, First Minister, although my joy in setting a personal best was somewhat reduced when the man who finished in front of me confided that he just had a hip replacement. But nonetheless, they're very important events, and I had set a personal best. First Minister, will you join me in recognising and paying tribute to the importance and significance of these park runs, which are making a growing contribution to getting a more physically active population right across the length and breadth of Wales?
Yes, I would. It's hugely important that people feel comfortable in taking exercise in ways that are appropriate to them. There were 2 points that I feared he would make. The first one he did make, namely that he has been involved in a park run himself. Second, he didn't make, which I welcome, and that was to invite me to join him to take part in a park run, because I know full well that he would certainly have the edge on me there. But it's hugely important that we're able to encourage people to take exercise in new ways, and park runs, of course, are an excellent example of how to do that.
Dai Lloyd.
Diolch yn fawr, Llywydd. Wel, yn dilyn o gwestiwn John Griffiths, fydd y prif weinidog yn cofio tro dwytha fi ennill balot unigol yn y lle yma ryw 6 mlynedd yn ôl, ac mesur i ddiogelu meisydd chwarae oedd hwnnw. Felly fi'n gobeithio bod yna adeiladu yn mynd i ddigwydd ar hyd y llinellau oedd John yn ei awgrymu. Ond mae fater o bryder hefyd, o'n i'n darllen yn ddiweddar, bod 13% o blant yng Nghymru yn gwneud dim ymarfer corff o un wythnos i'r llall. Pa gynlluniau ydych chi fynd i'r afel efo'r sefyllfa embydus yna?
Wel, mae'r rwydwaith Cymreig o ysgolion, cynllun rwydwaith Cymreig o ysgolion iach yn cefnogi ysgolion i ddatblygu cynlluniau mwyn gwella iechyd plant yn yr ysgol. Mae 99% o ysgolion yn rhan o'r rhaglen hynny, sef ysgolion sydd ddim yn ysgolion preifat. A hefyd, wrth gwrs, ni yn gweithio gyda'r Cymdeithas Llywodraeth leol mwyn cefnogi plant i gario mlaen gyda'i ymarfer nhw yn ystod gwyliau'r haf wrth sicrhau bod yna bethau ar gael iddyn nhw i wneud i gadw'n iach.
Mohammed Ashkan.
Officer, First Minister, the increasing access of countryside to families for responsible recreation could bring substantial benefits for the health and well-being of the nation. The consultation on improving opportunities to access the outdoors closed on 2nd October 2015. When will your government be in position to bring forward proposals that will encourage activities such as cycling and horse riding while protecting the environment and the livelihood of people who work in the countryside in Wales?
Well, let's look at Let's Walk Cymru. It's a Welsh Government-funded programme which sets up walking groups all over Wales. The aim of that is to introduce walking into people's daily lives to prevent the onset of conditions such as heart disease and obesity. That complements what we are already doing. Of course, it's important that people know where they can walk, and also people know where they can cycle. And of course, the Active Travel Act is a piece of legislation that helps us to develop those methods of both exercise and transport in Wales in the future.
Cwestiwn 4, Steffan Lewis.
What are the implications of the UK Government's industrial plan on Wales?
Well, thus far it is not full of detail, but we have long called for a rebalancing of the UK economy, and we'll carefully consider the UK's industrial strategy green paper when we see it in more detail.
Diolch, Llywydd. Obviously, the industrial plan will impact on devolved matters in some way, but although we won't exactly know that until the Welsh Government publishes an industrial plan for Wales itself. And in response to a question from my friend, the member for Carmarthen East and Dynefrdd last week, the Economy Secretary dismissed any need for an urgent industrial plan for Wales, with some suggesting that we might have to wait till late in the summer for a Welsh economic plan, let alone an industrial plan. When will the Welsh Government stop playing hide and seek with the future prosperity of this country?
Well, from it, unemployment rate is 4.1%. It's lower than England, Scotland and Northern Ireland. We've just had the best figures for foreign direct investment for 30 years. And we take the view that it's hugely important that we look to develop business, setting up the Development Bank for Wales, the National Infrastructure Commission for Wales as well. Some supporting sectors where they need support. We've not seen support from the UK Government for steel. We provided that support, and it's because of that support that there is a future in prospect for the Welsh steel industry. So, from our perspective, the figures speak for themselves in Wales. Heavy investment in skills as well to improve ultimately GDP per person and GDP across Wales. And we believe that the story that we can tell is a good one.
David Rees.
Well, First Minister, you just mentioned steel, and are you as disappointed as I am when I read through the industrial plan from the UK Government? There's very little reflection on steel. In fact, it reflects perhaps their whole approach to steel, non-existent effectively. Will you look at the industrial strategy? Because manufacturing is 16% of the GVA here in Wales. It's a major sector, so when you produce the economic strategy, we ensure that there's an industrial strategy within that to ensure that our manufacturing sector and our steel sector is reflected on the actions we take.
Well, by our actions, we are judged on what we have done for the steel sector in Wales. The financial support that we've provided, the fact that we've engaged so much with Tata and other steel makers, particularly showing them that we see steel as an important part of the Welsh economy. There's scant reference to steel in the Green Paper itself, despite the assurances we've heard from the UK Government about its central importance. We need to see more detail on how the UK Government will do its bit to support the steel industry.
Russell George.
In regards to your white paper on exiting the EU, First Minister, there's much I can agree on, but there does appear to be a lack of strategic planning to leverage the opportunities, I think, to grow the Welsh economy. We know that the Welsh exports were down in 2015. New business startups since 2011 have reduced by 26%. So in growing the Welsh economy, how is your paper linking with your prosperous and secure strategy that your Cabinet Secretary talked about last week? What Welsh Government plans are there to reverse the export declines and indeed support particularly new business startups?
Well, firstly, I thank him for what he said about the white paper, not describing it as the Beano Fuss, as we heard others in his party describe it as. He talked about SMEs. Well, we've got our repayable fund of SMEs, which offers repayable finance to SMEs. Immediately following the referendum, we did launch the Business Confidence Plan, which is a series of actions we're developing aimed at promoting business confidence. And that includes the announcement of the new Growth and Prosperity Fund, so that Wales remains an attractive place for businesses to invest. On top of that, Finance Wales has increased one fund and introduced two new funds as well. For example, the Wales Technology Venture Investment Fund and the Wales Business Fund. So we are determined to make sure that we can provide as much support as SMEs need. It's right to say there's still some uncertainty as to what happens post-Brexit. We don't know what the arrangements will be for accessing the single market, and until those questions are answered, then it's natural that some businesses who wish to export will wish to wait and see what happens before they take investment decisions.
Question 5, Hannah Blythen.
What assessment has the First Minister made of bank closures in North Wales?
I was concerned to hear of the further proposed bank closures. They're happening across Wales. What is absolutely crucial is that people, where they lose their bank branches, are able to access banking services through the post offices.
Thank you, First Minister. Just last week, HSBC announced its intention to close its branch in Holywell, hot on the heels of NatWest taking the same decision to shut the stores in the same town, the consequence of which are going to hit the high street hard. And I was joined by members of the community, my parliamentary colleague last Friday, to take a stand against this latest closure, and the hurt and the anger of local people was clearly palpable. They really feel enough is enough for the area. Indeed, when HSBC closed its bank in Flint last year, they advised customers they could relocate to use the Holywell branch, and they also shut their NatWest branch in Flint last year as well, leaving many, mostly the elderly, out on a limb. And whilst the banks make clear that it's possible to use the local post office, this is obviously not applicable to business customers, and also the future of Holywell Post Office is far from certain at present. So, First Minister, while I recognise that any legislation to protect our local bank branches would need to be done at a UK level, what is and can the Welsh Government doing to enable that people and businesses in my constituency and across Wales continue to access face-to-face banking and support our high streets who potentially suffer on the back of these closures?
Well, we have, of course, over the years supported our post offices financially, and they are hugely important in local communities. It is right to say that whilst personal banking services can be provided by post offices, the reality is most business customers don't get that kind of service, and that's what the post office needs to deliver, working with the banks. You know, when businesses cash up at the end of the day, where do they take their money? That's one of the issues. We look then at having night safes in post offices. That has to be a logical development. It helps the footfall of a post office as well. The difficulty with banking now is that footfall has dropped significantly in the branches, but there are people who need those services. And we must find a way, working with the post office, to make sure that those services are available to those people who need them. We've made representations over the years to the post office and indeed to the banks. I've done it personally to make sure that where banks decide they no longer want to be in a community, the post office is able to take over the services that they offer. And, of course, to look at the ways in which credit unions can provide financial services as well to fill the gaps that the commercial banks are leaving.
Rhyn ap Iorwerth.
Diolch Llywydd, dwi wedi codi pryderon hefyd yn y siambr yma efo'r Prif Weinidog ynglyn â chyfres o gyhoeddiadau yn fy etholaeth i. Mae yna ragor o gyhoeddiadau wedi dod yn diweddar ynglyn â sefydliadau ariannol, nid dim ond banciau yn CAI, HSBC yng Nghaergybi a Cymdeithas Adeiladu yr Yorkshire yn Llangefni ydy yr diweddara. Canlyniad hyn, wrth gwrs, ydy bod na ganoli, dwi'n meddwl, mewn hubs rhanbarthol. Da ni'n gweld patrwm o hynny yn digwydd ar hyn o bryd. Ac mae hynny yn amddifadu pobl o wasanaethau fel mae aelodau eraill yma wedi ei ddeud. Ydy'r Prif Weinidog yn cytuno bod angen i Lywodraeth Cymru bwyso ar Lywodraeth Prydain i sicrhau bod banciau, os nad fel cwmnïau unigol, ond fel sector yn sicrhau gwasanaethau ariannol a hygyrchedd iddyn nhw ym mhob cymuned yng Nghymru. Mae hwnna'n deg ac yn holl bwysig. Os mae'r banciau ffyr i wneud felly mae yna ddyletswydd yn marn i arnyn nhw i sicrhau bod yna ffyrdd eraill i ddilifro gwasanaethau cyllidol trwyddo'r swyddfa post a hefyd wrth gwrs fel Llywodraeth ni bod yn cefnogi undebau credyd mwyn bod nhw gallu llanw'r bwlch yma'r banciau masnachol yn gadael, fel wedys i yn gynharach. Wrth wneud hynny, fi'n credu bod bydd yn bosib i sicrhau bod bobl yn cael y gwasanaeth y dilyn y gael.
Mark Isherwood.
As HSBC told me when I met them last year to discuss their closures in Flintshire, as NatWest replied to me when I opposed and wrote to them regarding their closure in Holywell, as the Yorkshire Building Society is now saying, that the reason for this is the switch from bank-based service usage to digital usage. But of course, that, as is being now said by HSBC in Holywell, Holyhead and Clanroost, leaves older people, those without transport, those without internet access, shopkeepers and small businesses losing out. In that context, what dialogue or what submission did your government make to Professor Griggs' independent review into how banks have implemented the banking protocol to minimise the impact of bank closures, and in dialogue with the Post Office regarding their newly announced partnership to secure access to local banking services?
Well, we welcome the recommendations for better engagement and communication between the banks and customers, but it is important the UK government, as it were the lead organisation here, to make sure that what the review actually suggested is taken forward, namely that the banks improve the way they engage with those communities facing branch closures, including working with small business customers to see how they can further mitigate the challenge of cash deposits and the collection that closures bring to some of them. So whilst we welcome the recommendations, we do need to see action now on the part of the UK government.
Cwestiwn 6, Dawn Bowden.
Will the First Minister make a statement on support for micro-businesses in Wales?
Yes, business support is available for entrepreneurs, micro, small and medium-sized businesses across Wales through our Business Wales service, and our focus remains on supporting innovation-driven entrepreneurs, jobs and the economy.
Thank you, First Minister. And as well as the support you've referred to, I'm aware that that Business Wales provides considerable practical support for the way and guidance for developing businesses, such as business plans, research, marketing, managing, etc. In Merthyr Tydfil, we have a fabulous organisation called the Hoyle Hub, which offers facilitated office space for businesses to share resources and ideas under one roof. The facilitated space offers a one-stop, cost-effective environment to kickstart ideas and share skills, knowledge and success. And an important part of the Hub's role is not just to provide the facilitated office space, but it provides a forum for these new or developing small businesses to share experience and good practice and mutual support. Do you agree with me, First Minister, that initiatives like this can be incredibly beneficial to small businesses, particularly in their formative years, and have an important role to play in supporting the continued growth of new businesses in Wales, supplementing the work done by Business Wales?
Yes, I do, because sharing expertise, good practice and having a network of support is an important factor for startups. I know the Cabinet Secretary for Economy and Infrastructure, in conjunction with the Regional Entrepreneurship Acceleration Programme, REAP, is currently reviewing the requirements for incubation space, including the type of spaces that are needed in Wales, in order to make sure that provision is available in the future for micro businesses, some of whom will grow to be substantially larger and employ more people.
Cwestiwn 7, Susie Davies.
Diolch, Llywydd. Will the First Minister make a statement on the Henry review?
We welcome it. It supports the case for developing a tidal lagoon energy industry in the UK and the specific recognition it gives to the Welsh projects already under development around our coast.
Well, thank you for that. I think we all welcome it. You, I and other Assembly members in this chamber. What we don't need, of course, is the issue of the marine licence holding up any progress. Bearing in mind that I raised the delay with the marine licence with you in September 2015, how often has your government chased NRW to come forward with that licence in the last 16 months? And what reason has NRW given you for its very late species impact report, which presumably will inform the decision?
Well, NRW are an arm's-length organisation, and there is a limit to what we can appropriately say to them as they're determining a marine licensing application. Although I will say this, the application needs to be determined as swiftly as possible. And I think we all understand in this chamber the importance of the tidal lagoon to, in terms of jobs. We do also need to see, of course, a firm commitment now from the UK government in terms of the strike price in order to ensure that this very worthwhile project goes ahead.
Question 8, Hewyr Anker-Davies.
We were delighted that Charles Henry took the time to visit the Assembly last week and to brief Assembly members.
To ask the question on
What discussions has the First Minister had with the Prime Minister regarding the Swansea Bay tidal lagoon since the Henry report was published? Diolch yn fawr.
Can I thank the member for the heads up on his supplementary? Not directly with the Prime Minister, but I know that the Cabinet Secretary for Environment and Rural Affairs and the Cabinet Secretary for Economy and Infrastructure met Charles Henry last week. And officials are certainly in close contact with the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy in Whitehall.
Diolch am eich patience, Llywydd. Charles Henry, we were delighted he was here last week briefing Assembly members. It was a clear and resounding endorsement of the Swansea Lagoon as a pathfinder, and he said in his report, and I quote, the cost of a pathfinder project would be about 30 pence per household per year over the first 30 years. 30 pence. A large-scale project, he said, would be less than 50 pence over the first 60 years, and the benefits, he said, of that investment could be huge, especially in South Wales, but also in many other parts of the country. Having looked at the evidence, spoken to many of the key players on both sides of this debate, it is my view, said Charles Henry, that we should seize the opportunity to move this technology forward now. So, would the First Minister note the cross-party support here in the Senedd, the cross-party support among many Welsh MPs, the cross-sectoral business support, the university support, and whilst we do need to deal with the remaining environmental concerns, the wider NGO support for this landmark sustainable energy scheme? Would he further agree that this, as I said to Charles Henry when he first came here to take views, is a no-brainer? Or, as he said in his reports, a no-regrets policy for government, and we would welcome a supportive statement from the UK government for the Pathway project at the very earliest opportunity. What can he do to help get that supportive statement?
Very much so, and we've made that very, very clear. This is a project that does not just deliver green energy beyond our own lifetimes, which is not something we're used to predicting in politics, but that's the reality of it. It's also a project that has the potential to create at least 1,300 jobs, particularly in the Port Talbot area, maintenance and manufacturing of the kit that's required to generate the energy. And I hope we can get to a position where the marine licensing issue is dealt with, where the strike price is agreed, and we can move forward with a project that can only be of benefit to the people of Wales.
Ac yn ola cwestiwn naw, Hefin David.
Will the First Minister make a statement on recognition given to those who carried out their national service as Bevan Boys during and after the Second World War?
Yes, I know the member has a very firm interest in this issue, and we know that Bevan Boys, many of whom worked in dangerous conditions in the mines, played an integral part in helping to win the Second World War, and it is fitting that a memorial honouring them has been erected in the National Arboretum in Staffordshire.
I thank the First Minister for that, and I was recently contacted by my constituent, Mr William Beer of Llanbradach, who turns 91 this year and was a Bevan Boy during the Second World War. When the Bevan Boys programme was wound up in 1948, they didn't receive any medals, and their efforts went unrecognised until VE Day, 50th anniversary celebrations in May 1995. In June 2007, the UK government announced that former Bevan Boys would receive a veterans badge in recognition of their service. I feel still not enough. I'm going to be writing to the Bevan Boys Association to ask them to contact my constituent. But in the meantime, will the First Minister pay tribute to Mr Beer, and people like him and recognise his contribution to our country's security during the Second World War?
Indeed, I would, because even though they were not combatants, of course, without them, there would not have been the ability to release those who went into the armed forces. There would not have been the ability to fuel so many of the engines that were needed in ships particularly, and we know that the economy would have ground to a halt. That would have been as debilitating as military reversal. War pensions, for example, are not devolved. They have not been applied to Bevin boys. They are the responsibility of the UK government. But I would be happy to write to the responsible minister in the UK government to make him aware of the issues you've raised today, and of course the issue of war pensions and what should be done now to honour all those who are still with us, who contributed so much to the war effort.
Diolch i'r Prif Weinidog. Dwi wedi derbyn.